Imagine this. It's 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. You've just sat down at your desk with your coffee, right? And the door to your office flies open.
Oh, that is never a good start to a Monday.
No, it's really not. It's the head of your legal department, and they look completely panicked. They're dealing with a massive compliance audit, and they tell you that they need absolute mathematical verifiable proof that a highly specific batch of financial records from exactly 7 years ago was securely destroyed.
Wow. Okay, no pressure.
Right. And not only that, they need to prove to external auditors that absolutely no one in the company altered those files during that entire 7-year retention period.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I just threw a standard retention policy over the whole SharePoint site, that should be fine. You are about to have a very, very bad day.
Because a standard retention policy is going to fail that audit instantly.
Exactly. Welcome to the Admin Study Room. I'm Alex, and today we're getting into the high-stakes world of compliance.
And I am Jamie. Trying to retain all this complex configuration information for the exam is honestly just as tricky as configuring the retention policies themselves in Microsoft Purview.
Oh, totally.
Sometimes I feel like my own brain needs an adaptive scope just to figure out what concepts to keep and what to permanently delete.
That is painfully accurate. Your brain's retention principles are definitely going to be put to the test today. So welcome, everyone, to Episode 7 of our study podcast for the AB-650 exam, which covers Administering Microsoft 365 and AI services.
Yeah, today is going to be a big one.
It really is. Today, we're settling in for a massive, comprehensive study session focusing heavily on data lifecycle management. Specifically, we're looking at retention, DLP alerts, DSPM for AI, and data risk. But before we map out the portal and really get into the weeds, I need to read our required show statement.
Right, let's get that out of the way.
This is an independent, unofficial AD650 study podcast for Microsoft 365 certified, administering Microsoft 365 and AI services. It is based on Microsoft's public learn content and is run by AI hosts. It is not affiliated with, authorized, sponsored, or approved by Microsoft.
Perfect. So thinking about the exam and thinking about that Microsoft 365 admin sitting down at their desk after that terrifying encounter with the legal team with the directive to completely manage and secure the life cycle of corporate data, where did they even begin?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Because if you log into the standard Microsoft 365 Admin Center, the one where you reset passwords and assign licenses, you're not going to find the heavy-duty compliance tools you need.
You absolutely will not. And if you're taking the exam, you need to know exactly where the boundaries of these admin centers lie. You are heading straight to the Microsoft Purview portal.
Okay, so Purview is the hub.
Exactly. Yeah. Consider Purview your central map, your ultimate command center for everything related to data lifecycle management. This is where you go for retention, for records management, to triage your data loss prevention or DLP alerts.
Right, and the Activity Explorer too, right?
Yes, Activity Explorer, and also to configure Data Security Posture Management or DSPM for AI. Microsoft intentionally separated these functions. The person resetting a user's password shouldn't necessarily be the same person who has the power to place a legal hold on the CEO's mailbox.
Yeah, separation of duties. That's just a core security principle.
Exactly. So you go to Purview, and when you get there, the very first conceptual hurdle you have to clear, and this is practically guaranteed to be tested from multiple angles on the exam, is understanding the fundamental architectural difference between a retention policy and a retention label.
I feel like this specific concept trips up so many admins, both on the test and in the real world.
Oh, all the time.
Because conversationally, they sound like two words for the exact same thing, right? Policy. Label. They both dictate how long we keep data. What is the practical day-to-day difference when you're actually building out a compliance strategy for an organization?
It fundamentally comes down to how broadly you're applying the rules, how much granularity you need, and what level of control or proof your legal team actually requires. So let's start with retention policies.
Okay, policies first.
Right. Retention policies apply broadly to locations or to users. Think of a policy as a massive, invisible blanket that you throw over an entire digital container.
A digital container, like a site or a mailbox.
Exactly.
Right.
You can apply a retention policy to all of Exchange or all of SharePoint or all of your Microsoft 365 groups or an entire user's OneDrive account. Anything that currently exists inside that location and anything that is created inside that location in the future is instantly subject to the rules of that policy.
Right, so let's make that concrete. If I apply a 5-year retention policy to the core marketing SharePoint site, every single document inside that site gets the exact same retention rule applied to it automatically in the background.
Yep, completely automatic.
The end users in the marketing department, they don't have to click anything. They don't have to tag anything. It is completely frictionless for them.
Exactly. It's broad, it's highly efficient from an administrative standpoint, and it requires zero user interaction. But as you said, it's container-based. The rule belongs to the SharePoint site, not to the file itself.
Ah, okay. The rule belongs to the container.
Right. Now contrast that architecture with retention labels. Retention labels apply item-level settings. You are not tagging a site. You're tagging a specific folder, a specific Word document, or a specific email in a mailbox.
So instead of blanketing the whole marketing site, I'm specifically tagging the Q3 financial projections spreadsheet with a label.
Precisely. And because the label is injected into the metadata of the item itself rather than belonging to the container, that retention rule travels with the content.
Oh, that's huge.
It's a massive distinction. If a user takes that labeled financial spreadsheet, downloads it from the marketing SharePoint site, and moves it into their personal OneDrive for business, the retention label and all the strict retention rules attached to it go right along with it. The protection survives the move.
Because the rule is basically baked into the file's digital DNA, essentially.
Yes, exactly. Whereas a retention policy does not travel.
Right.
If you move a file out of a SharePoint site that's governed by a retention policy and put it into a site that doesn't have a policy, that file leaves the jurisdiction of the original policy.
It's no longer protected by those rules.
Right. It's completely unprotected at that point.
That is a critical distinction for anyone taking the exam to memorize. Policies apply to locations, labels apply to specific items, and can travel with the document across your Microsoft 365 tenant.
Yep.
But let's circle back to that nightmare scenario you opened with. You know, the panicked legal team, the audit. There's another massive difference between policies and labels, and it has to do with records management, right?
Yes, and this is where the exam will really try to trick you. If a scenario states that your legal team comes to you and says, we need absolute proof for an external auditor that these specific financial documents were securely deleted at the end of 7 years.
Right, the proof of deletion.
And we need proof that they were absolutely never altered during that 7-year period. If you see that, you cannot rely on a retention policy. A retention policy simply retains the data quietly in the background and then deletes it quietly when the time is up.
There's no fanfare.
Right, there's no fanfare, and more importantly, there is no cryptographic receipt.
So what's the solution? How do we get that receipt?
The only tool in Microsoft Purview that can satisfy that requirement is a retention label. But not just any label. A retention label that has been specifically configured to mark the content as a formal record.
Ah, a record. That's the key word.
Yes. When a label marks an item as a record, it places incredibly strict, immutable restrictions on editing the document. And crucial for the exam, when the lifecycle ends and the document is destroyed, the system generates proof of disposition.
Let's unpack that specific term because it sounds like heavy legalese. Proof of disposition. What does an admin actually see when that happens?
It basically means you get a formal digital receipt. It is a certificate stored in the Purview portal that proves exactly what the file was, who applied the label, and the exact timestamp of when the system completely eradicated it from the servers.
And how long does Purview keep that receipt?
Purview keeps that certificate, that proof of disposition, for up to 7 years after the file is gone.
Okay, so if the exam question asks for proof of deletion or audit trails of destruction or preventing any edits to a final contract, the answer is never a policy.
Never.
The answer is always a retention label configured as a record.
Spot on. But this brings up a really practical question, and one that requires us to look under the hood of how Microsoft 365 actually works.
Okay, let's look under the hood.
We talk about data being retained, right? But if I have a retention policy in place that says retain all SharePoint documents for 5 years, and an end user goes into a document library and hits the delete key on file after only 2 years, what actually happens?
Well, the user sees the file disappear. To them, it's just gone.
Exactly. But as an admin, we know the policy dictates it must be kept for 3 more years. Where is that file physically sitting? It doesn't just float in the digital ether.
This is the hidden architecture of Microsoft 365, and for the exam, you absolutely need to know the names of these hidden storage locations.
Yes, you do.
They're different depending on the workload. So let's start with SharePoint and OneDrive. When a user deletes or modifies a file that is currently under a retention policy, a compliance copy of that file is instantly and automatically preserved in a hidden, secure location.
Right.
For SharePoint and OneDrive, That location is called the preservation hold library.
The preservation hold library. And there is a massive real-world caveat here that admins learn the hard way, and it makes for a great exam trap. Does the data sitting invisibly in the preservation hold library count against the organization's overall SharePoint storage quota?
Yes. Yes, it absolutely does.
It's painful.
It is, and this is why you cannot just casually set a retention policy to retain everything forever across your entire tenant. If you do that, every single time a user modifies a PowerPoint deck, a new version is quietly saved in the preservation hold library.
Yep. Versioning will kill your storage.
Exactly. Every time they delete a massive video file, it goes to the preservation hold library. Your SharePoint storage will skyrocket, you will hit your tenant limits, and your organization will be forced to buy more storage from Microsoft. You are basically paying for everything you retain.
Which is why governance is about balance, not just hoarding data. Okay, so SharePoint and OneDrive use the preservation hold library. What about email?
Right, Exchange is different.
Yeah, if an executive deletes a sensitive email and a policy says keep it, where does Exchange store the compliance copy?
Exchange has its own architecture. The hidden location in a mailbox is called the Recoverable Items folder.
Okay, recoverable items.
Yeah, users can actually access a portion of this if they click Recover Deleted Items in Outlook, but the deeper compliance subfolders within it are completely hidden from them.
Okay, so preservation hold library for SharePoint and OneDrive, recoverable items folder for Exchange. But the modern workplace isn't just files and emails anymore, right? What about the newer workloads?
You mean Teams and Copilot?
Yeah, Teams chats, Teams channel messages, Viva Engage conversations, and most importantly, interactions with Microsoft 365 Copilot. Where do those get retained?
This is where Microsoft engineering history becomes really relevant. For Teams, Viva Engage, and Copilot, the compliance copies go to a special hidden folder named Substrate Holds.
Substrate holds.
And here's the interesting part. Substrate Holds is actually a hidden subfolder located inside the Exchange Recoverable Items folder.
Wait, really? Why would Teams messages and Copilot prompts be stored inside an Exchange mailbox folder? That seems so counterintuitive.
It does, until you look at how the architecture was built. Microsoft didn't build a massive new compliance backend from scratch for Teams. Underneath Microsoft 365 is a data layer called the Substrate.
Oh, right, the Substrate.
Yeah. And when Teams was developed, it was built on the legacy foundation of Skype for Business, which heavily leveraged Exchange for storage and compliance. So when you send a Teams chat or ask Copilot a question, the compliance record of that action is essentially wrapped up and dropped into the user's Exchange mailbox architecture.
Wow.
Specifically in that hidden Substrate Holds folder.
That is fascinating, and understanding that legacy connection actually makes it so much easier to remember. The user has no idea this folder exists. It's completely invisible in their Outlook client.
Right.
But if you, as the compliance admin, run an e-discovery search, the system pulls those retained messages right out of the Substrate Holds folder.
Exactly. It's like a digital shadow dimension specifically built for compliance. So we know how to apply policies in, locations versus items, and we know where the retained data physically goes. Now we need to talk about who we apply these policies to.
Yes, scoping.
When you sit down in Purview to create a new retention policy, one of the most critical decisions you make is choosing a scope. The exam focuses heavily on the operational differences between static scopes and adaptive scopes.
This is a huge area for the exam, and you really need to understand the severe limitations of static scopes to understand why Microsoft pushes adaptive scopes as the modern best practice.
So let's define them.
Okay, an adaptive scope is dynamic. It is essentially a living query based on Microsoft Entra ID attributes. The scope constantly checks the directory and updates its membership automatically.
So it's always running in the background.
Yeah, exactly. For example, you can create a query that says, apply the strict 7-year retention policy to anyone whose department attribute equals legal, or whose job title equals executive.
I like to think of an adaptive scope as a highly efficient bouncer at the door of an exclusive club, checking IDs every single night.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, so if someone in the company gets promoted to an executive role today, HR updates their Entra profile. Tomorrow, the bouncer checks the directory, sees the new title, and automatically lets them into the retention scope. Their data is instantly protected.
Seamlessly.
And if a year later they step down or change departments, the bouncer kicks them out of the scope. The admin doesn't have to lift a finger. It is entirely automated based on identity attributes.
That is a perfect analogy. Now, compare that automated bouncer to a static scope. A static scope does not use queries. It is a manual, rigid configuration.
So no automatic update.
None. You can tell a static scope to apply to all instances, which is basically a blunt org-wide blanket, or you can manually specify inclusions and exclusions. So going back to your bouncer analogy, a static scope is like a VIP guest list on a physical clipboard.
Oh, sounds tedious.
It is. If a new executive is hired, the policy doesn't know. A global admin literally have to log into the Purview portal, open the retention policy, edit the scope, and manually type the new executive's name onto the inclusion list.
Which sounds like a complete administrative nightmare for an enterprise organization with tens of thousands of employees and constant turnover. You'd need a full-time employee just updating scopes every time someone is hired, fired, or promoted.
Exactly. It's prone to human error, and it leads to massive compliance gaps. But beyond just being annoying to manage, there is a very specific nasty technical trap regarding static scopes and OneDrive that is frequently tested.
Oh, this is the URL provisioning issue.
Yes, this is a major gut. Static scopes are terrible, frankly. They're fundamentally broken for managing specific targeted OneDrive accounts.
Why is that?
Because to include a specific user's OneDrive in a static scope, the system requires you to provide the exact URL of their personal OneDrive site. But here's the architectural trick in Microsoft 365. A user's OneDrive URL is not actually generated the moment their account is created.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it uses just-in-time provisioning. The URL does not exist until the user logs in and accesses their OneDrive for the very first time.
Oh, wow. So think about the onboarding process. You hire a new chief financial officer. It's their first day. As the admin, you want to make sure their data is compliant immediately. So you go to add them to the executive OneDrive retention static policy, but you can't.
You literally cannot. The system will throw an error because their OneDrive URL hasn't been minted yet. You have to wait for them to click the OneDrive icon and then remember to go back and add them later.
And it gets worse, doesn't it? What happens if that user's identity changes?
This is the fatal flaw of the static scope. Let's say that CFO gets married and they change their last name. HR updates their user principal name, their UPN, to reflect their new name.
Okay, standard HR process.
Right. But when the UPN changes, Microsoft 365 automatically changes their OneDrive URL to match it. Now, your static retention policy is pointing to a broken orphan link. Yep. The policy fails silently, and their highly sensitive financial data is no longer being retained by the compliance engine.
That is a massive governance liability. How do adaptive scopes solve this?
Adaptive scopes completely bypass the URL problem. Because an adaptive scope is querying Entra ID attributes like title equals CFO, it doesn't care what the URL is.
Right, it just looks at the person.
Exactly. It finds the user based on their identity, and then the system dynamically locates the correct underlying storage location under the hood, even if it hasn't been provisioned yet, or even if the UPN just changed yesterday.
So the key takeaway for the exam, if a scenario asks how to efficiently apply retention to a high turnover department, or how to target specific roles without requiring manual admin updates, or how to reliably target OneDrive locations, the answer is always, invariably, an adaptive scope.
Always. You want the system doing the heavy lifting, not your help desk. Now, before we move into the complexities of conflict resolution, we have to address perhaps the biggest conceptual trap of all.
Okay, what is...
It's a trap that executives fall into all the time, and the exam will test your ability to explain the difference. If I say Microsoft 365 backup and I say Microsoft Purview retention, am I talking about the same thing?
Not even close. Those stakeholders mix them up constantly. They both involve keeping copies of data, but their purposes, their architectures, and their recovery mechanisms are entirely different.
Right.
Retention, what we've been talking about, is strictly about compliance, regulatory requirements, and e-discovery. It's about a lawyer saying, we must keep this specific tax document for 7 years so we don't get fined by the government, and we need to be able to search for it.
Right. Retention is granular. It cares about the content of the file.
Exactly. Microsoft 365 Backup, on the other hand, is a completely separate product. It is about business continuity, disaster recovery, and specifically rapid recovery from ransomware attacks.
That's a huge distinction.
It does not care about what is inside the file. It cares about restoring an entire mailbox or an entire SharePoint site back to exactly how it looked at 2 p.m. yesterday before the malware hit.
And the underlying architectures reflect those different goals. Microsoft 365 Backup uses something called append-only storage. This is a critical concept.
Append-only? Okay, explain that.
Think about how ransomware works. Ransomware infiltrates a system, reads a file, encrypts the data, and then sends an API call to the storage drive to overwrite the original file with a new encrypted version.
It relies on the ability to modify existing data blocks.
Exactly. But append-only storage fundamentally rejects modification requests at the storage layer. Append-only means that new data can be appended to the backup vault, but existing data blocks physically cannot be altered, deleted, or overwritten by regular service operations, by rogue admins, or by malware.
Wow.
Yeah, so if ransomware encrypts a user's live mailbox, the backup vault remains completely safe because the ransomware literally lacks the permission and the storage level mechanics to overwrite the append-only data.
That is a brilliant defense mechanism. Now, from an administrative lifecycle perspective, how does backup handle offboarding? Like, if an organization decides to switch to a third-party vendor and cancels their Microsoft 365 backup subscription, does all that append-only data vanish instantly?
No. Microsoft provides a safety net. Backup offers a strict 90-day grace period. It acts like a massive soft delete recycle bin within the backup tool itself.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, if you offboard the service, you have exactly 90 days to recover or export your backups before they are permanently and irreversibly purged from Microsoft servers. And here is the ultimate exam key regarding these two systems. Microsoft 365 Backup is completely isolated from Purview retention policies.
Meaning they do not talk to each other.
At all. A Purview retention policy that says delete all data after 1 year cannot reach into the Microsoft 365 backup vault and delete data. Conversely, a backup policy keeping data for disaster recovery does not satisfy the legal, granular retention requirements for records management and e-discovery.
They operate on parallel isolated tracks.
Exactly. You need retention for the lawyers, and you need backup for the ransomware.
Okay, that clarifies the landscape beautifully.
Yeah.
But let's get into the real headache for a compliance admin. It all sounds relatively simple when we talk about one policy in a vacuum.
Oh, yeah, but real life is messy.
Exactly. In a massive enterprise, a single file can easily be targeted by multiple overlapping rules at the exact same time. You could have a baseline org-wide policy, a specific adaptive scoped policy for a department, and a manual retention label, all fighting for jurisdiction over one single document. How does the Purview engine decide what wins?
Welcome to the principles of retention. This is the conflict resolution rulebook, and I cannot stress this enough. You must memorize the 4 levels in exact order.
In exact order, okay.
Yes. If you apply these 4 rules step by step, like a mathematical flowchart, you will never get a conflict scenario question wrong on the exam.
All right, let's walk through the flowchart. What is level 1?
Level 1 is the prime directive, retention wins over deletion, period.
Retain beats delete.
Always. If you have a policy that says, delete this file in 3 years, but you also have a label that says retain this file for 5 years, the file is kept for 5 years. The logic here is risk mitigation. Compliance and preservation always beat cleanup.
That makes total sense. Keep the data safe first, ask questions later.
Right, because if the system permanently deletes a file, it is gone forever. That's a destructive action that could result in legal penalties. So permanent deletion is entirely suspended as long as any valid retention command is active on the file.
Okay, so that's level 1. But what happens if you have 2 rules that both agree to retain the data, but they specify different lengths of time?
That brings us down to level 2. The longest retention period wins. If policy A says retain for 5 years and policy B says retain for 10 years, the item is retained for 10 years.
Okay, straightforward enough.
Yeah, the system evaluates all active retention periods, and the absolute longest timeline dictates the protection shield.
Okay, so levels 1 and 2 are relatively straightforward. They figure out exactly how long the file is shielded from destruction. But what happens at the end of that protection timeline? Once the retention shield drops, what if there are conflicting rules about when to execute the deletion?
This is where it gets highly specific. We drop down to level 3, explicit wins over implicit for deletions. You have to categorize your rules.
Categorize how?
Well, a retention label is considered an explicit action because a user or an auto-labeling engine examine that specific item and apply the rule directly to it. The intent is highly explicit.
Right, someone made a choice about that specific file.
Exactly. A retention policy, on the other hand, is considered implicit because it just applies a broad blanket to a whole container. The policy doesn't know what the file is, it just knows it's in the bucket.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on this, because if I am the global compliance administrator and I set a strict org-wide policy that says delete all financial documents after 5 years, you're telling me that a single end user in the accounting department can apply a label to one document and completely override my deletion policy.
Yep, that's exactly what I'm telling you.
That seems like a massive governance loophole. Why would Microsoft design it that way?
Because specificity implies contextual knowledge. The global admin setting the 5-year blanket policy is making a broad assumption. The accountant who applied a specific 10-year tax audit label to that one particular spreadsheet actually knows the context of that exact file.
Ah, I see.
Therefore, a label's delete action always, without exception, beats a policy's delete action. Explicit intent overrides implicit assumptions.
Even if the policy is an adaptive scope, what if I targeted the accountant specifically?
Yes, even then. Labels trump policies for deletion. Now, if we were only looking at policies, no labels involved. The rule of specificity still applies.
Okay, so between two policies.
A specific, targeted, scoped policy, like an adaptive scope looking only at executives, will beat an org-wide apply to all instances, static policy. The rule that is most precisely aimed at the data wins the right to dictate the deletion schedule.
Okay, I understand the logic now. Specificity wins. But what if there's a true tie? What if two scoped policies both target the exact same file and both have competing delete actions, and neither is a label?
Then we reach the final tiebreaker, level 4. The shortest deletion period wins.
Shortest delete wins. Okay.
If scope policy A says delete at 7 years and scope policy B says delete at 10 years, the file is permanently destroyed at the 7-year mark.
Wait, why not the longer one this time?
Because the retention shield from levels 1 and 2 has already expired. There's no active command to keep it anymore. The system looks for the very first valid command to clean it up and executes.
Okay, this is a lot of theory. Let's put this into practice. I want to roleplay a highly complex scenario, the kind you would see directly on the exam.
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Okay, you are managing a senior executive's OneDrive. There is a single, highly sensitive contract sitting in a folder. Let's look at the active rules. First, there is a 5-year delete-only policy applied to the entire tenant to save space.
Okay, 5-year delete, tenant-wide.
Second, there is a 3-year retain then delete policy applied via an adaptive scope specifically for executives. Third, the executive's assistant manually applied a 7-year retain-only label directly to the contract. What is the ultimate fate of this document? Trace the timeline.
Okay, we have to run it strictly through the flowchart, no guessing. First, we start at level 1. Retention wins over deletion. We look at all the actions. We have retain actions and delete actions in play. Because retention always wins, the document is shielded, deletions are suspended.
Makes sense.
Next, we move to level 2. Longest retention wins. We evaluate the retention commands. We have a 3-year retain rule from the adaptive policy, and we have a 7-year retain rule from the manual label. 7 is longer than 3. So the document is securely shielded for exactly 7 years.
Okay, the shield is up for 7 years.
Now, we've fast-forwarded 7 years. The retention shield drops. We have to figure out the deletion schedule. We look at our pending delete actions. We have a 5-year delete action from the org-wide policy and a 3-year delete action from the adaptive policy.
What about the label?
The label was retain only. It has no delete action configured. So at the 7-year mark, the system looks at those pending delete actions. The 3-year and 5-year triggers passed years ago, but they were suspended by the level 1 retention shield.
Right, they were put on pause.
Exactly. Now that the shield is down, those delayed deletion actions immediately kick in. The file is permanently deleted right at the 7-year mark.
That is brilliant. Running it through the logic levels completely removes all the guesswork. If you try to intuitively guess the answer, you will definitely get it wrong.
You absolutely will.
But wait, I know there is an exception to these foundational rules. It's a newer feature called priority cleanup. When would an admin actually use that to bypass everything we just discussed?
Priority cleanup is exactly what it sounds like. It is a heavy-handed way to bypass the standard rigid retention principles when you have massive amounts of low business value data clogging up your expensive storage.
Oh, like Teams recordings.
Exactly. Think about the modern reality of Microsoft Teams. Every single daily sync, every quick huddle is being recorded. Video files, transcripts, Copilot recap files, they are absolutely massive. Now, imagine you have a standard org-wide policy that says retain all SharePoint data for 5 years.
That would be so expensive.
You do not want to pay Microsoft to store a daily sync recording of people talking about their weekend for 5 entire years.
No, those recordings are usually useless after a few weeks once the action items are transcribed.
Exactly. So you can configure priority cleanup to specifically target those large, low-value file types like Teams meeting recordings and permanently delete them after, say, 1 to 3 months. This priority cleanup rule will completely ignore and override the 5-year org-wide retention policy. It forces the deletion to save you money.
Are there security applications for priority cleanup as well, like beyond just saving money?
Yes, and this is critical for incident response. Priority cleanup can be used by security teams for data spills. Let's say highly confidential HR data like employee social security numbers is accidentally uploaded to a public, company-wide SharePoint site.
Yikes.
Yeah, nightmare scenario. Standard retention principles might dictate that data on that site must be retained for 3 years. But it's a massive privacy violation. An admin can use priority cleanup to purge that spilled data immediately, bypassing any retain-only rules that would normally block the destructive action.
That is incredibly practical and a great tool to have in the arsenal. Okay, so we've extensively covered how to hold on to data for compliance and how to surgically clean it up. But retaining data securely in the vault is only half the battle.
Oh, absolutely.
What happens when that highly sensitive data tries to leave the organization? That leads us straight into our next major topic, data loss prevention or DLP alerts.
While retention policies manage the lifecycle of data at rest, DLP is your active inspector for data in motion. I like to think of a DLP policy not just as a perimeter guard, but as an automated, highly suspicious customs agent.
A customs agent, I like that.
Yeah, it doesn't just check if you have a ticket to leave. It physically unzips your digital briefcase, cracks open your Word documents and PDFs, reads the text using keyword dictionaries and regex patterns, and if it finds a pile of credit card numbers, it confiscates the bag and stops the transfer.
And blocks the user.
Exactly. When a user violates a DLP rule, say, trying to email that document to a Gmail account, the action is blocked and an alert is generated for the admin.
And where do admins actually go to see these alerts? Because knowing which dashboard to use is half the battle on the exam.
You actually have 2 main dashboards, and you need to understand the retention limits of both. You can view the alerts directly in the Purview DLP Alerts dashboard, but be highly aware, for the exam alerts in the Purview dashboard are only retained for 30 days. After 30 days, they age out and disappear.
30 days is not a lot of time if you are doing a long-term historical investigation.
It isn't. That is why alerts are also routed to the Microsoft Defender portal. In Defender, those same alerts are kept for a much longer period of 6 months.
Okay, so 6 months in Defender.
Right. Defender also gives you a more unified security view, because a DLP alert might just be one piece of a larger puzzle. If a user's account is compromised, Defender will correlate the anomalous login alert with the DLP data exfiltration alert, grouping them into a single incident.
Let's talk about the actual investigation workflow, because in the real world, and heavily tested on the exam, admins don't just stare at lists of alerts, they have to actually process them.
Right.
How do you triage these without drowning in alert fatigue? Because a large organization can generate hundreds of DLP alerts a day.
Alert fatigue is very real. Microsoft provides 3 distinct tools within the Purview dashboard to help you triage effectively. First is the standard view, which is your traditional manual grid of alerts. You click an alert, look at the Details tab, review the matched conditions, and start digging.
Sounds tedious.
It is. Second is the Alert Triage Agent, which leverages automation to group similar alerts. But the third tool, the absolute game changer that Microsoft is integrating everywhere, is Microsoft Security Copilot.
How does Security Copilot actually help an admin staring at a DLP alert? What does it physically do?
It eliminates the cross-referencing. When you open a complex alert, instead of you manually clicking through 5 different tabs to piece the story together, you can click Summarize with Copilot. Copilot instantly analyzes the telemetry and generates a natural language summary.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it tells you the severity of the alert, the exact policy and rule that was triggered, the name of the file and a direct link to review it, the current status, and the email address of the user who caused the violation. It essentially writes the incident report for you. You can literally click copy and paste that summary straight into your ServiceNow or Jira ticketing system.
That saves a massive amount of time. Now, if I am investigating manually or I need to dig deeper than the summary, what other tabs am I looking at in the alert details?
You will always check the Events tab, which lists every single granular action associated with the alert. But the really powerful Context-Rich tab is the User Activity Summary tab. However, there's a massive exam catch here that you must know.
What is the catch?
This tab will be completely empty unless you have explicitly turned on a specific integration in your tenant settings.
What is the integration?
You must enable data sharing with Insider Risk Management.
Ah, Insider Risk Management. And why is that opt-in? Why wouldn't Microsoft just show you the data by default?
Because Insider Risk Management involves heavy privacy implications. It tracks user behavior over time. European privacy laws, works councils, and HR departments often require strict approvals before you can monitor an employee's aggregate behavior. So Microsoft leaves it off by default. You have to actively opt in.
Makes sense, given the legal landscape. If you do have a legal clearance and you opt in, what does that user activity summary tab actually reveal?
It is incredible for investigations. It shows you up to 120 days of historical exfiltration activities for that specific user.
120 days.
Yes, so you don't just see the one file they tried to email today. The tab reveals that over the last 3 months, this user has been quietly downloading thousands of files to a USB drive, renaming sensitive documents, and uploading data to personal Dropbox accounts. It gives you the full historical context of their behavior.
That is a totally different picture.
It really is. It changes the investigation from a user made a mistake to a user is systematically stealing data before resigning.
Which is the perfect transition into a major exam concept investigation versus tuning. When you get a DLP alert, you have to classify it. It is fundamentally either a true positive or a false positive, and your administrative reaction has to be completely different based on which one it is.
Exactly. If you choose the wrong action on the exam, you will fail the scenario.
So let's define them clearly.
A true positive means the policy worked exactly as designed and intended. A user actually tried to leak sensitive data, and the system caught them. Your action here is investigation and response. You need to contain the threat.
What does containment look like?
This might mean going into Entra ID and revoking the user's active sessions, forcing a password reset, generating a shareable link to the alert to send to HR or the legal team, and ultimately resolving the security incident in the portal once the employee has been disciplined.
So true positive equals incident response. Containment. What about a false positive?
A false positive means the system was overly aggressive and blocked something it shouldn't have. It impeded legitimate business. For example, maybe a user was trying to upload a benign internal cafeteria menu to a vendor, but the menu happened to contain the phrase routing number in reference to the delivery trucks.
So the engine got confused.
Right. The DLP engine saw routing number, assumed it was financial bank data, and slammed the door shut. In this case, you absolutely do not launch a security investigation. You don't call HR. Your action is policy tuning.
Policy tuning. So you're adjusting the underlying rules so the engine gets smarter and stops annoying the end users.
Exactly. And the exam will ask how you tune it. You might adjust the confidence levels required to trigger the rule, telling the engine it needs an 85% match certainty instead of 60%.
Okay, or add exceptions.
Yes, you might add specific exceptions to the rule, like block financial data, except if the document originates from the HR SharePoint site. You might adjust the instance thresholds, saying only trigger the block if there are more than 5 credit card numbers in the document, not just one accidental string of numbers.
What if a whole department is getting flagged?
In that case, if a specific department is constantly generating false positives, you might modify the scope of the policy entirely to exclude them.
Now, in the real world, tuning takes time, but business has to happen right now. Sometimes a user has a highly legitimate business reason for sharing sensitive data, and they are blocked by a true positive.
Yeah, that happens a lot.
For example, an HR rep legitimately needs to email a tax form containing Social Security numbers to the company's registered external accounting firm. The DLP policy blocks it. How can an admin empower the user to unblock themselves without forcing them to call the help desk and wait for a ticket to be resolved every single time?
This is where you configure user overrides. When you build the DLP rule, you can allow a user to bypass a restrictive block by providing a formal business justification. They get a pop-up and they have to type in a reason, like sending this tax form directly to our registered accounting firm per protocol.
That's super helpful.
It is, and that justification is logged in the alert for the admin to audit later, but the email is allowed to send.
That sounds great for productivity, but is there a configuration trap there?
A massive one. To allow user overrides, the admin must first enable the setting within the rule that says, notify users in Office 365 services with a policy tip.
Wait, why are those two things linked?
Think about the user experience. If you don't show the user a policy tip explaining why they were blocked, your email contains financial data. The system has no interface to present them with the override text box.
The box lives in the tip.
Exactly. The override option lives inside the policy tip UI. If policy tips are disabled, the block happens silently, and the user cannot override it, even if you check the override box in the admin center. They go hand in hand.
Okay, that is a great architectural detail. Policy tips must be enabled for user overrides to work.
Got it. Now let's talk about the endpoints. We've talked a lot about Exchange and SharePoint, but DLP can also be deployed to Windows devices to block physical actions, right?
Yes, like copying a sensitive file to a USB thumb drive or printing it.
When scoping a device DLP policy, what is the major trap admins fall into? The scoping trap for Endpoint DLP revolves around the A&D condition. When you create a DLP policy and select the device's location, the wizard asks you to define the scope by selecting users and by selecting devices. For an Endpoint DLP policy to actually successfully enforce a block on a laptop, both the user logged into the machine and the device itself must be included in the active policy scope.
Wait, so it's not an either-or situation?
No, it is a strict A&D condition.
Yeah.
If the user's in scope but they borrow a colleague's laptop that is unscoped, the policy does not apply. They can copy data to a USB.
Wow.
Conversely, if an unscoped user logs into a highly secured scoped device, the policy does not apply. The Purview engine requires both the identity and the hardware to match the scope before it deploys the rules to the endpoint.
That is a brilliant detail to remember for troubleshooting questions on the exam. Okay, so DLP is watching our perimeter. It's stopping data from leaving the endpoint via USB and stopping it from leaving the tenant via email, but the perimeter is rapidly changing.
It really is.
The new frontier of data risk isn't just external sharing. It is internal oversharing combined with generative AI. Users are now feeding massive amounts of corporate data into Copilot. How on earth do we govern that?
This brings us to Section 4, DSPM for AI. That stands for Data Security Posture Management for AI, and it is all about securing Microsoft 365 Copilot. But before we talk about managing the risk, we have to establish the foundational facts about how Copilot handles data.
Right, because if an admin doesn't understand this, they can't secure it.
Exactly. When you open Word or Excel or Teams and you ask Copilot to summarize a meeting or analyze a spreadsheet, what data is actually saved by Microsoft?
The exam is definitely going to test the privacy boundaries here because executives ask this exact question every single day before deploying AI.
Oh, they panic over it. When a user interacts with Microsoft 365 Copilot, Microsoft stores 3 specific components of that interaction. First, the users prompt the actual question they type. Second, Copilot's generated response. And third, the citations business, the specific links and references to the internal SharePoint documents or emails that Copilot used to ground its answer.
So prompt, response, citations.
Together, those 3 elements form the Copilot activity history.
And what is the privacy stance on that stored history? Is Microsoft secretly using our corporate financial data to train the master AI model?
This is a crucial exam fact and a crucial real-world selling point. No. This interaction data is fully encrypted at rest within your tenant boundaries, and it is strictly not used to train the foundation large language models. Your corporate data remains your corporate data. The AI processes it in memory, gives you the answer, and forgets it.
Okay, so the data is secure from Microsoft's perspective. They aren't training their models on our secrets. But from the internal admin's perspective, we still have a massive problem.
We do.
How do we see what sensitive data our own users are exposing to the AI? If a curious employee asks Copilot to summarize an unreleased quarterly earnings report they somehow got access to, how do I, as the compliance officer, know that happened?
You use Data Security Posture Management, or DSPM for AI.
Yeah.
This is a dedicated dashboard built directly into Purview, specifically designed to illuminate the black box of AI usage. It provides deep visibility into sensitive data exposure, risky AI interactions, and critical policy gaps.
Where does that data actually show up, though?
When users interact with Copilot, all those auditing events flow silently in the background directly into the Purview Activity Explorer.
Activity Explorer is that master log of all data interactions. Where exactly do I look in there? It's a massive haystack.
You navigate to Activity Explorer and filter by the specific tab labeled AI Activities. That dashboard is where you will see the exact prompts and responses that involve sensitive data flagged by your existing exact data match or keyword dictionaries.
Okay, so the AI Activities tab.
Additionally, if you need to run a formal e-discovery search for legal reasons, say an HR investigation into inappropriate AI use, you need to know the specific property query. You create a search looking for the property item class with the value ipm.skypeteams.message.copilot.*.
Let me make sure I've got that. Item class equals ipm.skypeteams.message.copilot.*. And again, we see that legacy Skype Teams architecture appearing in the property name.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Knowing that history makes this impossible to forget.
Yeah.
Now, DSPM for AI does more than just log activities. It also provides risk assessments, right? It looks
Yeah.
at your environment and tells you where you are vulnerable before an incident happens.
It does. It integrates with Compliance Manager to offer a dedicated AI risk assessment. But you need to deeply understand the limitations of a risk assessment for the exam. Here is the trap. A risk assessment in Compliance Manager identifies your exposure, calculates a risk score, and recommends specific actions. It does not automatically fix every issue for you.
Right. It's a map, not a self-driving car. Insight does not equal enforcement.
Beautifully said.
If the DSPM assessment highlights a massive red flag saying, you have 500 highly sensitive HR documents sitting on a legacy SharePoint site with open org-wide access, the assessment just flags it. The vulnerability is still there. It is entirely up to the admin to do the remediation.
Exactly. Remediation requires the admin to take concrete action using other Purview tools. How do you fix that overly permissive SharePoint site before Copilot weaponizes it? One of the best ways is to apply sensitivity labels.
Now, we haven't talked much about sensitivity labels today. We've talked about retention labels. How do sensitivity labels help with Copilot?
Sensitivity labels are incredible because they encrypt data and enforce access control. And crucially, you don't just have to apply them to individual files. You can apply sensitivity labels to digital containers, like Microsoft 365 groups and SharePoint site.
Oh, to the whole site.
Yes, if you apply a highly confidential HR-only sensitivity label to the HR SharePoint site, it enforces privacy settings at the site level, preventing anyone without the HR label from accessing the contents, regardless of the underlying SharePoint permissions.
And why is that so critical for Copilot?
Because oversharing is the ultimate enemy of generative AI. Copilot respects user permissions. If a user has access to a file, Copilot have access to that file to generate answers for that user.
Ah, I see where this is going.
If your permissions are sloppy, if the HR site wasn't locked down, Copilot will cheerfully surface sensitive salary data to a regular employee just because they asked a clever question and the system realized they technically had read access to the file.
So Copilot essentially acts as a massive magnifying glass for bad permissions.
Exactly, which is why DSPM for AI is so critical. It highlights those oversharing risks, allowing you to run access reviews and enter ID, update your DLP rules, and deploy sensitivity labels before Copilot leverages that open access to leaked data internally.
That is a terrifying operational reality. What about retaining the Copilot data itself? We talked about the Substrate holds folder earlier, but how do we configure the policies to ensure those AI chats are kept for legal reasons?
When you build a retention policy, there's a specific location toggle you can target called Microsoft Copilot Experiences. But there's a really cool advanced feature regarding retention labels and Copilot that you should be aware of.
Okay, what is it?
Users often upload files directly into the Copilot chat pane to ask questions about them. These are called cloud attachments. You can create an auto-apply retention label policy specifically configured for cloud attachments and links shared in Copilot.
And what does that specific configuration do that a normal policy doesn't?
It captures the exact version of that cloud attachment at the exact moment it was referenced by the AI. Think about the legal implications.
Oh, because documents change.
Yes. If a user asks Copilot to analyze a contract, and then a week later they go into SharePoint and modify that contract, a standard retention policy just keeps the newest version. But this auto-apply label takes a snapshot. The compliance copy retained in the background is the exact version that Copilot analyzed.
That is massive for e-discovery.
It is. It allows lawyers to prove exactly what information the AI was given and what state the document was in at that specific moment in time.
That is incredibly granular, powerful control.
Wow.
Wow, we have covered a staggering amount of configuration logic today, from the fundamental differences between DLM policies and labels, to the complex flowchart of conflict resolution, to DLP triage and the intricacies of DSPM for AI.
It's a lot to process.
I think to really lock this in for the listener, we need to run through a quick rapid-fire scenario round. Let's test the practical application of everything we've just discussed.
I love it. Section 5, Scenario Review. I will give you the real-world scenario. You tell me the precise administrative answer or configuration required.
Bring it on. Let's do this.
Scenario 1. You are an administrator who has just been pulled into a hostile meeting with external corporate auditors. The auditors demand absolute, verifiable proof that a specific batch of vendor invoices from a legal dispute was securely deleted at the end of their life cycle, and they demand proof that no one altered those invoices before the deletion date. What is the only Purview feature that can accomplish this?
Okay, based on the requirement for absolute proof and immutability, a retention policy cannot do this. A policy just quietly deletes data. The correct answer is to use a retention label that has been explicitly configured as a record.
Yes, exactly.
Only records management provides the restrictive editing controls to prevent alteration, and crucially, only records generate the formal proof of disposition certificates required by external auditors upon deletion.
Spot on. Perfect. Okay, scenario 2. You are monitoring the Purview DLP alerts dashboard. A high-severity alert triggers because an end user uploaded a PDF to an external cloud drive. The DLP policy matched a financial data rule. You investigate the alert using Microsoft Security Copilot's summary feature and realize the PDF is actually just the internal cafeteria menu for the week.
Oh, the classic cafeteria menu.
Right. However, the menu contained the word routing in reference to the delivery trucks, which tripped your keyword dictionary. What type of alert is this, and what is your immediate administrative action?
This is a classic false positive. The system worked, but the context was wrong. There is no actual security threat, no data leak. Therefore, my action is not investigation, containment, or incident response. My action is policy tuning.
Policy tuning, absolutely.
I need to go into the specific DLP rule and adjust the exceptions, perhaps excluding documents with the word menu, or increase the confidence threshold so everyday words don't keep setting off massive security alarms and causing alert fatigue.
Yes, exactly. Incident response is for true positives. Tuning is for false positives. Last one, scenario 3. Your organization's chief risk officer is terrified about deploying AI. They are worried that Microsoft 365 Copilot is going to read highly sensitive HR documents stored on a legacy SharePoint site and accidentally summarize employee salaries for random staff members who ask the AI questions.
Very valid fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
What Purview tools do you use to monitor this specific risk, and what tool do you use to proactively prevent it?
Okay, this requires a two-part approach. First, to monitor the risk and gain visibility, I would use DSPM for AI. Specifically, I would look at the Activity Explorer, filtering for the AI Activities tab to view any sensitive data exposure happening within user prompts.
And for prevention?
Second, to proactively prevent the AI from leaking the data, I need to fix the underlying oversharing vulnerability. I would use sensitivity labels. I would apply a highly restrictive sensitivity label at the container level directly to the HR SharePoint site. This restricts access to only HR personnel. Because Copilot respects user permissions, if a random user doesn't have access to the site via the sensitivity label, Copilot doesn't have access to the data on their behalf. The risk is neutralized.
Perfect. You nailed the remediation. Insight is great, but enforcement via labels actually stops the leak. Let's do a final rapid recap of the most dangerous, common exam traps we've discussed today.
Okay, let's hit them.
Track 1. Retention is not backup. Retention is granular and designed for legal compliance and e-discovery. Backup is for disaster recovery, protects against ransomware, and uses immutable append-only storage. They operate independently.
Trap 2, policies apply broadly to locations. Labels apply specifically to items and can travel with the document if it moves across the tenant.
Trap 3. In a retention conflict, retain always wins over delete to prevent accidental data destruction, and explicit labels always beat implicit policies when dictating deletion schedules.
Trap 4, static scopes are dangerous for managing OneDrive accounts because the URLs use just-in-time provisioning and change if a user's UPN changes. Always use dynamic adaptive scopes for reliable targeting based on Entra ID attributes.
And Trap 5. An AI risk assessment gives you valuable insights into oversharing, but insight does not equal enforcement. You still have to do the manual remediation using labels, DLP rules, or access reviews.
This has been an incredibly dense, highly technical study session. But these are exactly the nuances, the architectural mechanics that separate a passing score from a failing one on the AB-650 exam. Understanding the why behind the configurations, why explicit beats implicit, why Copilot relies on site permissions is what truly matters most.
It really is.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this massive session, I want to leave you with a provocative thought, something for you to mull over as you prepare for the exam and for the future of IT administration. As generative AI becomes more deeply embedded in literally all of our workflows, the line between a traditional document and a conversation is blurring rapidly.
Yeah, they are merging.
Think about this. If a user types a prompt into Copilot, and Copilot generates a massive, highly sensitive block of text based on analyzing a 10-year-old Word document that was retained solely for compliance reasons, how will your organization govern the life cycle of that new AI-generated conversation?
Wow.
It isn't a file, it isn't an email, but it contains all the sensitive data of a retained legal document. It's a completely new compliance frontier, and it's something every Microsoft 365 admin is going to have to strategize on very soon.
That is a terrifying and absolutely fascinating thought to end on. The perimeter is gone, and the data is conversational. Before we go, I have to read our mandatory closing statement. This episode is a study aid, not official exam guidance. Always verify important details against the latest Microsoft documentation.
Thanks for studying with us today in the admin study room. Keep reviewing those retention principles, master the conflict resolution flowchart, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Good luck studying.